All right, let's start. So my topic is basically LWC basics and component communication. What I'll be talking about is the difference between wire and connected callback and how to communicate between parent and child, ways a parent can send data to child and how a child would react to it and then send data back to parent. I want to thank our sponsors for making this happen. I want to thank Destined. Special thanks to Hamza Bhai for giving us a chance to speak at Park Dreaming. Little bit about me. I'm a platform developer one certified. I have like 2 years of experience, and before that, I was working as a React developer. Currently, I'm working at Destin. Destin is a media mouse company, and we have a stall there. Please do visit. So, the agenda of my session is basically the difference between a wire and a connected callback, when to use what, and how are they basically different from each other. From after that, we'll be talking about how we can send data from parent to child, and then how can we send data back from child to parent. So, connected callback. What is connected callback? Connected callback is basically a live hook event, and basically whenever your component, when you render it, when your component is hooked into the DOM, it gets called. Connected callback is basically runs only once. Whenever the component is logged in, it runs only once. And let's assume that we have like a child component that is called from a parent component. So since the child is connected from the parent, the parent's connected callback would be called first, and then the child, when the child is connected, the child's connected callback would be called. Wire is somewhat similar. However, the difference is wire does not only run once. It has a it monitors its parameters, and whenever the parameters change, the wire is called again. So 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 I'd say the the major difference between a connected callback and a wire is that wire keeps on calling itself recursively. I have a piece of code here. Basically, I wanted to show you the comparison between the two. So what happens is, if you can see that I have a wire and I have a connected callback, both in my component. So when I run the component, what happens first is first the wire runs, and we see. Uh, Let me just go back. Sorry. So basically, what we have is the record ID of the account, which on which my component rests. So the wire runs, and initially the since the page hasn't loaded, the ID isn't filled yet. The wire runs with an undefined ID, and then the connected callback runs. It's this hierarchy is not because of the because my connected callback is down. It's the way this component lifecycle runs. First the wire runs, then the connected callback runs. Then first my wire ran and the ID was undefined. Then then the constructor of the component ran. I got my ID in the connected callback, and since the wire was noticing record ID, it ran again with the ID, and I got my results. So that is the major difference between wire and connected callback. Now, onto the second stage of our session is component communication. For this, I'll share my screen and I'll try to show you through code. Um, can you see my screen? Is my screen visible? Can you see my VS Code? Cool. So basically what I did was, in my preparation, I just created a app page and I rested my parent component here. What it does is there's nothing much in it yet. I've just added a card. I've made a counter in my JS file. initialized it with 0, and I've used the counter in my front end. So when I deploy it, I see the counter being displayed here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add like two buttons to increase and decrease this counter. So LWC button, this, and I'm going to replicate it. Success. Increment. Increment. We don't need the title. So I've made two functions. I've made two buttons and two functions. What I'll do is I'll declare their handlers in my JS file. What I'll do with the counter in the increment is this dot counter plus equals to 1. Similarly, for my counter decrease, what I'll do is -1. Yep. Once it gets deployed, what we'll get on the front end is basically two buttons. When I press increase, the counter should go up. When I press decrease, it should go down. That makes sense. Now, I'll add a child component. I've made a child component. It's pretty much empty. So what I'll do is basically from my HTML, I'll pass this data to my child component. It says C child component. One thing to notice is basically you can see that my child component name is capital C, small c, capital C. However, when I call it, we have to camel case it and we have to append a C and a hyphen. And I want to send the counter. So what I'm going to do is counter is equals to counter. And then declare this counter as an API here. In my child component, what I'll do is I'll also create a card just to show the data. LWC card child component. We don't need the icon. We don't need the button. I need to show the counter here. So what I did here is basically I called the child component and then I passed the counter. I passed counter variable of the parent to the counter variable of the child. Let's rename this. Let's rename this counter child. I'll rename this so we can understand this better. Oh, again, we cannot have camel case in the while calling the child components. Basically, in LWC, whenever we're talking to the child components, we have to use the kebab case. So when I increase, basically what's happening is the parent component has a counter 3, and the child component has a property, a public property of child counter, and parent passes the data of counter to the child component. So when I increase, it increases. When I decrease, it keeps decreasing. All right. So let's say basically what we have done now is we've passed data from parent to child. Now what we want to do is pass data from child back to parent. So what I'll do is basically I'll create two buttons on child as well. Let's just create these two buttons. Handle child, handle child. In my increment, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say I'm going to pass an event back to parent saying that you need to call your increase counter. So how we do that is let new event. Mm, what this is basically a child, the child component dispatches an event to parent, and we need to pass the name of the event. So for the for when we're going to increase the value, my event name would be increase value, and when we are going to decrease the value, we're going to call it decrease value. We could add payload here, but for this piece of code, we don't need much of it. And then what we do have to say is let me just confirm the syntax. No, increase value and same. And then say dispatch new event. Basically, it's the same thing. Uh, okay. So what I've done here is I've created two handlers, and each handler is going to pass a different event. The increase handler will pass the increase value, and the decrease handler will pass the decrease value event. And how do I catch this in my parent is basically there's a keyword on and the name of the event. So the name of the event is increase value on increase value on decrease value. What I can do is I can create new events, new handlers for basically the child event, but our code is relatively very simple, so I'm just going to use the parents counter, parents handlers, and then deploy the child first, and then deploy the parent. Guys, if you have any questions, please feel free to post. I cannot see I cannot see the screen, so once we are done, we can move to the question and answers. So let's say parent increases, the child increases, the child increases, the parent increases. What's happening here is these two buttons are on the child component, and when I call increase, what it does is it sends an event to the parent that says increase your value. So basically, child is sending data back to parent. Child is basically sending an event, a signal to parent that you need to increase your value. So when I click increase, it's increasing the parent's value, and that is being reflected on the child. When I click decrease, uh, I think there's an issue with the decrease function. Let me check that real quick. And the child decrease. Let's put some debugs. So child value is being called. However, the parent is not receiving it. Let me see what the issue is. Child is called new event. Ah, yes, sorry, my bad. Okay. So, however, okay, now this works. This works fine. Oh, there's one more thing that we need to do is we need to. All right, this is already done. All right. So what we've done is basically we've sent data from parent to child and then from child to parent. However, there is one issue. Basically, what we've done is basically this is a simple counter, right? What happens when this is not just a single variable? It's an object or a let's say an array of objects or just an array. What happens then? Let's say I'm going to call this counter, and this is an object. It has two attributes: name. Let's say it's a score counter, and it has let's say a value count 0. What we're going to do is we're going to increase the count, and we're going to display the count as well. So what's happening here is basically, as you can see, my parent decrease function is being called. However, the changes are not being reflected. Why is that? That is because what happens is this object, whenever we change the value of the counter, which was an integer or just a normal variable, what happened was whenever we changed it, the values were being tracked. However, when when we use it on an object's attribute, the object is not being changed, so the value is not being changed. What I could do is I could add a keyword called track, and now it works. However, we need to make some changes to the child as well. Let's go and say child.count. And do we need anything else? Do we need anything else? And this works fine for us. So this is how we can send data from parent to child to parent, and how we can manipulate data between each other. Um, Now moving on to the questions. Do we have any questions? I will stop sharing my screen. I guess not. So what we can do now is maybe we can run the raffle. Let me just pop the link real quick.